Hey folks, tonight we're diving into something intricate, and let's be honest, a bit smelly. The medieval inn. This was where exhausted travelers collided with questionable stew, where ale flowed as freely as lice, and where half your night was spent debating whether the noise upstairs was snoring or a slow death. So before you get cozy, take a sec to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment about where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always wild to see who's tuning in from across the globe. Now, dim those lights, maybe crank up a fan for some white noise, and let's drift into tonight's journey together. The innkeeper doesn't so much wake up as he's jolted awake by the sound of a sneeze splattering onto the floorboards below, followed by a groan, a crash, and the unmistakable clatter of a chicken bolting out the front door. Again, he cracks one eye open. Still dark outside, which means it's either too early or too late. There's no in-between in medieval timekeeping. He peels himself off the bed like a slice of bread stuck to a loaf, rubbing sleep from his face with a sleeve that once resembled linen but now feels like a worn-out saddlebag. His bed isn't terrible, just basic. A straw mattress tilted at a slight angle, a blanket faintly scented with garlic and last Tuesday's ale. Cozy, if you don't ask too many questions. Dressing happens in stages. First the tunic, then the trousers, then the belt, if he can find it. After a brief hunt, he spots it dangling behind the door alongside a spoon, a candle stub, and someone's lone sock. He doesn't ask whose. Asking questions before sunrise is a rookie mistake. Downstairs, the common room is eerily quiet. Signs of life. A toppled mug, a boot near the hearth, and a man snoring under a table with the confidence of someone who's made it his permanent address. The innkeeper steps around him carefully. Waking guests too early often leads to sword point negotiations. He pokes the hearth with a practiced flick of the poker, aiming for warmth, not a bonfire. Firewood's expensive, and the last time he got a proper blaze going, someone tried to roast a goose indoors, feathers still on. As he sets a pot over the flames to reheat whatever last night's stew has morphed into, he hears the distant bray of a mule and the thud of early arrivals. He exhales. The inn isn't glamorous, but it's warm. It's busy, and most importantly, it's his. And just like that, another day begins. Breakfast here isn't so much a meal as it's a negotiation between what's edible and what won't land you in legal trouble. The innkeeper ladles a glop of something into the pot. It doesn't have a name, but it does have a smell, somewhere between boiled oats and a wet boot that's been flirting with cabbage. This is pottage, the medieval version of a concept dish. Yesterday's batch had barley and turnips. Today's features those same turnips, now softer, and mystery bits from the goose that lost last night's escape attempt. Add water, heat, repeat. It's like soup that gave up halfway. The bread? Present, but with the density of a roof tile and the chewiness to match. It's sliced carefully, not out of courtesy, but because the innkeeper's tired of breaking knives on it. Guests gnaw slowly, partly for digestion, partly to reflect on life choices between bites. And the ale? Breakfast beer. Not a medieval trope, a necessity. The local water's dubious. The milk's reserved for the Lord's barn cat, and tea won't be invented for centuries. The ale's weak, but at least it's been boiled and filtered through sheer desperation. Even the kids drink it, supervised, of course. This is a reputable establishment. Guests trickle in. A merchant clutching his coin purse like a holy relic, a pilgrim muttering about blisters, and inevitably the bard, who requests honey for his porridge as if honey hasn't been locked in a chest since the last tax collection. The barmaid, nimble and immune to nonsense, weaves between tables like a dancer who's over it. She smiles, refills mugs, and dodges bad poetry with the grace of someone who's heard every drunken rhyme in existence. By breakfast's end, the inn smells of smoke, barley, and dashed dreams. Bowls clatter onto tables. Stomachs are fooled, spirits are lukewarm. It's not fine dining, but it's hot, filling, and nobody's died yet, which, by medieval standards, is a win. If there's one thing a medieval inn doesn't need more of, it's people. Yet by mid-morning, they pour in like seagulls with luggage and roughly the same regard for personal hygiene. First through the door is a self-proclaimed knight, armor mismatched, rusted, and held together with what looks like curtain rope. He demands a private room despite having no coins, no manners, and the general aroma of a horse that lost a bet. Hot on his heels comes a merchant's apprentice who talks like he owns a fleet of ships, but pays in buttons. He haggles over soup prices as if this place runs on coupon deals. Then arrives the bard. Everyone has one. He never pays, but insists his songs are worth more than gold. Spoiler, they're not. His lute missing 6 strings, he immediately launches into a mournful ballad about lost love and goat theft. A performance nobody requested. Next shuffles in a monk, nodding solemnly while eyeing the bread. He announces he's fasting, until he isn't. Within minutes, he's devouring said bread, justifying that technically it's not a sin if the loaf was pre-broken. By noon, the inn is a circus of clashing personalities and overlapping stenches. Someone's drying socks by the hearth. Another sharpens a knife for no discernible reason. A child sprints between tables, chased by a vengeful goose. In the corner, 2 travelers bicker over the lone stable stool. And presiding over this chaos is the innkeeper, calm as a monk on payday. He's seen it all before. By nightfall, someone will fall in love, someone will face-plant into their soup, and someone, probably the bard, will challenge furniture to a duel. He pours another ale, wipes the counter with a rag that's seen 3 plagues, and exchanges a nod with the barmaid. A silent pact that despite everything, this madhouse still stands. The guests may be loud, unpredictable, and occasionally bleeding, but they're what makes the inn live. Though he wouldn't mind fewer goose-related incidents. If the inn has a soul, or at least a functioning brain, it's the barmaid. Her name is Marjorie. She could be 20, 30, or possibly aged prematurely from exposure to traveling poets. No one knows for sure. What they do know is the entire operation would collapse into a stew-soaked disaster without her. She navigates the chaos with the precision of a battlefield surgeon, one hand balancing a tray of mugs, the other swatting away wandering hands with reflexes faster than a ferret in a spice cabinet. Her skills are legendary. A drunken mercenary once made the mistake of complimenting her ankles. He woke up 2 days later with his boots nailed to the ceiling. Marjorie takes orders in 4 dialects, pours ale without spilling a drop, and insults nobility without technically committing treason. She's not rude. She's ruthlessly efficient. In a building held together by hope and splinters, she's the only real authority. She knows which travelers will pay in coin and which will try to barter with seashells. She can spot a fake accent, a stolen ring, or a flirt disguised as a food complaint. Even the monk muttering about sin knows the truth. Marjorie is the patron saint of keeping this ship afloat. Her day starts before dawn and ends long after the fire burns low. In between, she'll serve stew, break up fights, bandage wounds, and somehow refill every mug in the room, all while dodging airborne cutlery or mediating debates about who owns the goose that wandered in during lunch. The magic? She never drops the tray. On paper, Marjorie doesn't run the inn. In practice, it's her kingdom. The innkeeper may own the walls, but she commands the floor. A wink here, a sharp word there, a stare that could curdle milk. It's a delicate dance performed daily with the grace that comes from years of low expectations and high tolerance. Lunch at a medieval inn isn't so much a meal as it is an extreme sport for the senses. It begins deceptively simple, the hearth glowing, stew bubbling, Marjorie ringing the dented iron triangle that signals food is ready. A fleeting moment of peace, instantly shattered by a stampede of hungry guests materializing from every shadowy corner. A merchant vaults over a sleeping dog. The bard swings his battered lute like a battle axe. 2 farmers argue over seating rights despite 6 empty benches existing, and absolutely no one keeping score. The innkeeper ladles out bowls of pottage, its ingredients known only to God and the pot itself. It's hearty, warm, and utterly flavorless, unless you count regret as a flavor. When one guest asks if it's vegetarian, another asks what vegetarian even means. The innkeeper pretends to be deaf. The bread arrives with a thud that echoes through the rafters. recently employed as a doorstop, now repurposed as edible masonry. Diners attempt to soften it in their stew, resulting in multiple bowl casualties. One man tries trading his crust for more ale, and shockingly, it works. Marjorie weaves through the madness like a one-woman circus act, tray loaded with mugs, eyes glazed with the thousand-yard stare of war veterans and overworked mothers. She delivers food, forced smiles, and thinly veiled threats simultaneously. Near the hearth, two guards compete in a belching contest, while a suspiciously cheerful monk hums hymns between bites. The goose makes its triumphant return, clearly enjoying the company. The chaotic symphony lasts about an hour, measured not by clocks, but by how long it takes for someone to spill ale, accuse another of dice cheating, or attempt singing with a mouthful of onion. When it ends, there's a brief, eerie silence, until a spoon clatters to the floor and the whole madness begins anew. The aftermath of lunch resembles an archaeological dig conducted by drunkards. Bowls lay overturned like miniature siege engines, their mysterious contents seeping into the wooden grain of tables. The innkeeper surveys the damage with the weary resignation of a man who's seen too many battles against gravy stains. Marjorie moves through the wreckage with military precision. Her broom is less a cleaning tool and more a weapon against entropy itself. She unearths artifacts beneath the benches, a rusted spoon bent at a suspicious angle, a dice carved from what might be bone, but you don't ask, and someone's left shoe, now permanently fused to the floor by something sticky and best left unidentified. Cleaning is a generous term for what happens next. The rag used on tables hasn't been cleaned since the last crusade, merely redistributing the grime into artistic patterns. Spilled ale gets absorbed by the floorboards, the secondary alcohol distribution system. The chamber pot in the corner has developed its own ecosystem, emitting bubbles at irregular intervals. Through some alchemy known only to veteran and staff, yesterday's stew remnants become tomorrow's soup base. The pigs get the questionable bits, or maybe it's the other way around. No one checks too closely. Mugs get washed in a ritual involving the rain barrel and what might generously be called prayer. Just as the last breadcrumb is swept under a rug, the medieval equivalent of closing a browser tab, new voices erupt at the door. Fresh victims, guests, arrive with questions that make the innkeeper's eye twitch. "Do you serve almond milk?" demands a man whose beard could shelter small animals. The silence that follows is so profound you can hear a stool reconsider its life choices. Behind him, an unmarried couple asks to inspect their room with the nervous energy of people who definitely won't be using it for sleeping. Marjorie just points upstairs. It has walls, sometimes a roof. What more could they want? As evening descends, the inn transforms into a theater of the absurd. The bard, now on his third attempt at musical entertainment, strikes a chord that makes the ale mugs vibrate in protest. His ballad about the lady in the leaky chamber pot earns him a broom to the shins, politely delivered by Marjorie. In the corner, two merchants debate grain prices with the intensity of generals planning a siege, while nearby, a couple argues about the flea population in their rented bed. The supper stew makes its grand reappearance, slightly thicker than before, as if the pot is slowly evolving into a new life form. The bread could double as a defensive weapon. The innkeeper handles it with the caution of a man disarming a trap. When one guest dares to remark that the stew tastes different tonight, Marjorie's glare could freeze hell. "It's the same stew," she declares, ladle hovering like the sword of Damocles. The guest immediately backpedals. Lovely consistency. Meanwhile, the self-proclaimed knight from earlier has successfully bartered his services for ale, though his services appear to consist solely of loudly recounting battles that definitely never happened. The monk, now thoroughly abandoned his fasting vows, uses theological loopholes to justify his fourth helping. And the goose? It's back, now sitting regally beneath a table being hand-fed by a child who insists it's his emotional support livestock. Through it all, the innkeeper maintains the expression of a man who has accepted his fate. He polishes a mug that hasn't been cleaned since the last lunar eclipse. watching his patrons with the serene detachment of a shepherd observing particularly stupid sheep. He knows the script by heart. Someone will spill, someone will snore into their drink, and the bard will inevitably try again. Because in the grand tradition of medieval inns, supper isn't about nourishment. It's about surviving until breakfast. Nightfall at the inn doesn't bring peace. It transforms chaos into a different beast entirely. The bard, now thoroughly pickled in ale, attempts a dramatic recitation of the ballad of the flatulent blacksmith, forgetting half the verses and substituting the rest with improvised sound effects. A group of merchants by the fire have escalated from debating to betting, wagering copper coins on which of them can balance a spoon on their nose the longest. The monk, having fully embraced his inner glutton, is now explaining how technically, gluttony isn't a sin if you chew slowly. Upstairs, the sleeping arrangements would make a modern health inspector faint. The private rooms are shared spaces where strangers snore inches apart in communal beds that creak like haunted ships. Straw mattresses rustle with every movement, sometimes from the straw, sometimes from the things living in it. One traveler talks in his sleep about turnips. Another hums hymns through his nose in a tone that suggests divine disapproval. Privacy is non-existent. The chamber pot sits conspicuously behind a curtain that fools absolutely no one. Back downstairs, the innkeeper begins his nightly ritual, part security check, part existential journey. With a candle stub that casts more shadow than light, he surveys his domain. The benches where their new coat of ale stains proudly. A spoon floats in the beer barrel like some pagan offering. The front door, which has moods of its own, threatens to swing open at any moment, so he blocks it with a bucket. Medieval security at its finest. As he counts the day's earnings, mostly coins, some buttons, and what might be a chicken tooth, the building itself seems to breathe around him. A broom falls over for no reason. The candle flickers despite no draft. And from the empty common room comes the unmistakable pluck of a lute string, though the bard is currently passed out in the stable. The innkeeper sighs. By his standards, this counts as a quiet night. Dawn at the inn arrives like a reluctant apology. The first rays of sunlight creep through cracks in the shutters, illuminating a scene that would make a housekeeper weep. The shared dormitory stirs with all the grace of a bear waking from hibernation. Groans, creaking joints, and the unmistakable sound of someone stepping on another's hand in the pre-dawn gloom. A merchant sits bolt upright, convinced it's midday, only to be hissed back into bed by his still-sleeping neighbors. The monk, who went to bed claiming indigestion, now snores with the rhythmic precision of a blacksmith's bellows. Someone's boot has mysteriously migrated to the hearth overnight. The goose watches this development with what might be amusement, if geese were capable of such complex emotions. Downstairs, the innkeeper exists in that peculiar state between asleep and awake, his body upright behind the counter, but his soul still wandering in whatever dreamland barkeeps visit, probably a place with clean mugs and silent customers. He blinks at the morning light like it's a personal insult. Marjorie arrives like a storm front wrapped in a shawl. Her morning routine is part forensic investigation, part damage control. Two stools lie defeated in the corner. A candle has vanished into the ether. Someone, for reasons unknown, smeared jam on the broom handle. The questions start immediately. Has anyone seen my satchel? Did I pay last night? Is this my goat? To which Marjorie responds with the same dead-eyed maybe. The denials are even more creative. I didn't snore. That's not my knife in the ceiling beam. I never called the monk's sandals heretical. The bard reappears, bleary-eyed and announcing he's composed a new epic about last night's events. He's promptly handed a bowl of porridge and ordered to eat quietly. For once, he obeys. As the sun climbs higher, most guests settle their tabs with coins, promises, or the occasional chicken. Some leave sheepishly, others with the unearned confidence of men who think they were charming. But one universal truth remains. Nobody ever admits what really happened after supper. The Dutch Golden Age dawned like a tulip forcing its way through frozen ground. Unexpected, vibrant, and slightly absurd. while the rest of Europe was busy burning heretics or polishing royal crowns. This soggy little republic of merchants and milkmaids quietly built an empire on herring, hubris, and oil paint. It began with what historians politely call accounting with cannons. The Dutch East India Company wasn't just a business. It was a pirate fleet with a corporate mission statement. Their ships cut through ocean waves and moral boundaries with equal ease, hauling nutmeg from islands they didn't own to sell to people who didn't need it at prices that should have been criminal. Back home, shareholders sipped spiced wine and pretended not to hear the screams coming from their balance sheets. Meanwhile, in cozy Amsterdam townhouses, a different kind of revolution brewed. Artists like Vermeer turned pantry maids pouring milk into religious experiences. Lighting their canvases like Caravaggio discovered light bulbs. Rembrandt painted old men's wrinkles with such devotion you'd think aging was a sacred calling. For the first time in history, butchers and bakers could commission portraits where they looked as solemn as saints, provided they paid up front. Then came the tulips. Oh, the tulips. What started as a gardener's hobby became the world's first speculative bubble. Grown men wept over striped petals. Fortunes were traded for single bulbs. A sailor once ate what he thought was an onion. It was actually a Semper Augustus tulip worth a canal house. When the market crashed in 1637, it left behind bankruptcies and a valuable lesson. Never trust a flower that can't decide if it's food or finance. Through it all, the Dutch maintained their signature blend of piety and pragmatism. They built churches with hidden Catholic altars for business partners. They painted biblical scenes while running the world's largest slave market. And they created stock exchanges where you could gamble on spices that hadn't been harvested yet. The original futures market. The Olympic Games of 776 BC didn't open with fireworks or celebrity performances. Just a cook named Charybdis sprinting 600 feet in nothing but his determination and a coating of olive oil. This was sport stripped to its bare essentials, sometimes literally, where victory brought not gold medals, but a wreath of twisted branches and the right to have your thighs immortalized in song. The athletes arrived like walking contradictions, warriors who'd rather wrestle than fight, philosophers who believed sweat was the path to enlightenment, and at least one competitor who trained by running between kitchen shifts. They competed naked not for titillation, but because the Greeks considered clothing a form of deception, though the real deception was pretending anyone could look dignified while getting pinned in oily combat. Events ranged from the straightforward, sprinting one-stayed length, to the brutally creative pancration, where only eye gouging and biting were forbidden, and even those rules got flexible when the judges weren't looking. The discus throw was less about strength and more about not decapitating spectators, while chariot racing combined the excitement of horse racing with the casualty rate of modern demolition derbies. Winners received no cash prizes, just eternal glory and the occasional lifetime supply of free meals. Losers slunk home to face compositions so scathing they made modern Twitter roasts seem gentle. Poets like Pindar would immortalize your failure in verses that stung for centuries, ensuring your great-great-grandchildren still blushed at family gatherings. Yet for all its quirks, the ancient Olympics were deadly serious. Athletes swore sacred oaths before Zeus himself. Cheaters faced fines so heavy they funded bronze statues of their shame. And the 4-year Olympiad cycle became the closest thing the Greek world had to a unified calendar. Proof that nothing brings people together like organized competition and schadenfreude. The Whiskey Rebellion erupted like a bad hangover, slow, painful, and entirely predictable given how much everyone had been drinking. In 1791, the fledgling United States government, desperate for revenue after the Revolutionary War, made the catastrophic mistake of taxing the one thing frontier farmers held sacred, their homemade liquor. Alexander Hamilton, the architect of this brilliant plan, envisioned a tidy system where Western Pennsylvania's stills would fund the national debt. What he got instead was a revolt where farmers armed with muskets and hangovers tarred tax collectors, declaring this taxation without representation 2.0. The rebels saw themselves as patriots reenacting 1776, The government saw them as ungrateful drunks who forgot who won the war. President Washington faced his greatest crisis since the Revolution, not from foreign powers, but from his own citizens. In a move that would make modern presidents blanch, he personally led 13,000 troops into the Appalachian Mountains, becoming the only sitting U.S. president to command an army in the field. The show of force worked. The rebellion collapsed faster than a drunk on payday, with most rebels suddenly remembering urgent business elsewhere. Only 2 men were convicted of treason. Washington, in a stroke of political genius, pardoned them both, proving the new government could be both strong and merciful. The whiskey tax limped along for a few more years before Jefferson repealed it, but the rebellion's real legacy was cementing federal authority. Farmers learned the hard way. You can fight City Hall, but you probably shouldn't do it while City Hall has cannons. The legacy of these historical episodes lingers like the stubborn smell of medieval stew or the ghostly pluck of that phantom lute string. Each story, whether the chaotic inn, Dutch capitalism, ancient Olympics, or whiskey rebellion, reveals the same eternal truth. Human nature never really changes. Only the costumes and technologies do. The medieval innkeeper's daily struggles mirror modern service workers battling unreasonable customers. Marjorie the barmaid would recognize her spirit in today's overworked waitresses and nurses. Those Dutch merchants speculating on tulip bulbs? They've simply been reincarnated as crypto bros hyping the next meme coin. The Olympic athletes craving fame found their descendants in Instagram influencers. And the whiskey rebels' anti-tax fury still fuels political campaigns centuries later. What makes these stories endure isn't just their historical significance, but their uncomfortable familiarity. We laugh at the bard's terrible songs because we've all suffered through open mic nights. We wince at the chamber pot's horrors while checking Yelp for clean bathrooms. That in sticky floors have their modern equivalent in every questionable nightclub we've ever regretted entering. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. Usually in off-key verses sung by drunken poets. These tales remind us that behind the parchment and artifacts, our ancestors were just people trying to get through the day with some dignity intact, often failing hilariously. Their world was louder, smellier, and more dangerous, but their dreams and frustrations would feel instantly recognizable to any modern observer. Perhaps that's the real value of studying history, not to memorize dates, but to recognize ourselves in those straw-filled mattresses, those tulip-crazed markets, those rebellion plans hatched over one too many drinks. The settings change, but the human comedy remains stubbornly consistent across the centuries. As our journey through these historical vignettes concludes, we're left with a peculiar aftertaste, equal parts laughter and recognition. The medieval inn's chaos, the Dutch Golden Age's contradictions, the Olympic Games' naked ambition, and the Whiskey Rebellion's hangover politics all share a common thread: humanity's endless capacity for reinventing the same dramas with different props. What makes these stories resonate isn't their exotic antiquity, but their startling modernity. That self-important knight at the inn? He's the guy at your local bar, still talking about his high school football career. The Dutch tulip speculators? They're day traders staring at Bloomberg terminals. The Olympic athletes risking everything for glory? Look no further than college athletes playing through concussions. And those whiskey rebels? Their anti-government rhetoric still echoes in every tax season's social media rants. History's greatest trick is convincing us we're more sophisticated than our ancestors. We may have replaced chamber pots with smart toilets and parchment with Twitter, but our fundamental struggles remain unchanged. We still wrestle with power dynamics in taverns and boardrooms, still chase glory on fields and spreadsheets, still rebel against authorities real and imagined. The stages have better lighting now, but the scripts are suspiciously familiar. Perhaps this is why we keep returning to these stories, not as dry academic exercises, but as mirrors held up to our own absurdities. When we laugh at the bard's terrible poetry or the monk's flexible fasting rules, we're really laughing at ourselves. That innkeeper's 1,000-yard stare speaks directly to every service industry worker who's ever counted the minutes until closing time. In the end, These historical fragments offer us the rarest of gifts, perspective. They remind us that civilizations rise and fall, but human nature remains stubbornly, comfortingly predictable. Our ancestors may have worn different clothes and believed different myths, but their hearts beat to the same rhythms of ambition, frustration, and dark humor that drive us today. The more things change, the last torch sputtered its dying breath, casting elongated shadows that danced like drunken revelers across the ale-stained walls. Marjorie rubbed her aching lower back as she surveyed the common room, a battlefield of overturned stools and abandoned trenchers. The scent of wood smoke and sour beer clung to her woolen dress as she began her nightly ritual. Click, clack. The sound of dice rolling in the shadowy corner caught her attention. Brother Anselm's gambling ring was in full swing again, his tonsured head gleaming in the moonlight filtering through the cracked shutters. She watched as the merchant from Flanders, a man with fingers permanently stained by ledger ink, pushed a small pile of silver toward the center of the table. His hands trembled slightly, whether from too much drink or the weight of his wager. Marjorie couldn't tell. Double or nothing, the merchant declared, his Flemish accent thickening with each cup of Rhenish wine. Anselm's smile didn't reach his eyes. "As you wish, my son," he murmured, making the sign of the cross over the dice with one hand while palming a second set with the other. Marjorie rolled her eyes. Some habits never changed. Near the dying hearth, Sir Reginald, self-proclaimed knight of some forgotten order, was attempting to negotiate with a skeptical fur trader. This gauntlet belonged to Charlemagne. Reginald slurred, brandishing the rusted piece of armor. The fur trader sniffed and poked at the metal. "Charlemagne's gauntlet wouldn't have chicken grease stains," he retorted. Marjorie sighed and turned toward the buttery. The knight's real business awaited. As she lifted the hidden floorboard, the scent of curing meats and damp earth rose to greet her. Below lay her true treasure, a small barrel of unwatered wine, 3 wheels of suspiciously acquired cheese, and the ledger where she tracked who owed what to whom. Thump! She whirled around to find young Tom the stable boy frozen mid-step, an empty tankard in hand. His eyes darted between her and the hidden stash like a cornered hare. "And Mistress Marjorie, I just—" "Fetch water for the horses," she interrupted, voice low. "And if I catch you near my stores again, you'll be drinking from their trough." As Tom scurried away, Marjorie allowed herself a small smile. The night was young, and the inn never truly slept. It merely blinked, waiting for the next fool to stumble through its doors. A frigid draft slithered through the cracks in the shutters as Willem the wool merchant awoke with a start. That familiar, urgent pressure in his bladder left no room for dignity. The dreaded midnight pilgrimage could not be delayed. The chamber pot sat in its usual place near the stairs, a battered pewter sentinel glinting in the moonlight. Willem hesitated. 3 other shapes already huddled nearby in various stages of distress. The red-faced miller's apprentice, doing the hop of urgency. A veiled noblewoman trying, and failing, to maintain decorum. Old Tom the tinker, who clearly hadn't made it in time. Willem's mind raced. Do I wait my turn like some common peasant? Or, a sudden inspiration struck. He drew himself up to his full height and adopted the tone he used when negotiating with Florentine buyers. "Good people, as a licensed merchant of the Hanseatic League, I propose an orderly." "Piss off, handsome man," growled the miller's boy, elbowing past. The noblewoman seized the moment of distraction, lifting her skirts just enough to claim the pot. A collective groan rose from the growing queue. Willem's cheeks burned, both from indignation and the physical strain of holding back a flood. Up in the rafters, the inn's resident owl hooted what sounded suspiciously like laughter. The first rays of dawn painted the tavern's floorboards in pale gold as Marjorie heaved open the shutters. A chorus of groans rose from the pallets where travelers lay in various states of disarray. The scent of last night's spilled ale mingled with wood smoke and the unmistakable tang of regret. Clang! She struck the iron triangle with malicious precision, watching with satisfaction as a dozen hands flew to throbbing temples. "Breakfast in 5 minutes," she announced, or not at all. By the hearth, Young Peter the scribe sat hunched over like a wounded bird, his ink-stained fingers trembling around a tankard of the innkeeper's infamous morning ale, a concoction so potent it could wake the dead and make them immediately regret it. He took a tentative sip and gagged. God's teeth, is there tar in this? Just honey and herbs. Marjorie lied smoothly, already moving to the next table where the German merchant was attempting to chew on what appeared to be a piece of the table itself. That's your bread, she informed him, prying the wooden trencher from his grip and replacing it with an actual loaf, hard enough to crack walnuts, but technically edible. The merchant blinked blearily at the exchange, his bloodshot eyes speaking volumes about the previous night's choices. In the corner, Brother Anselm was performing his morning ritual of pretending not to be hungover while surreptitiously feeding his sausage to the inn's three-legged cat. The creature purred like a rusty hinge, its single eye fixed on the monk with unsettling intensity. Breakfast is a gift from God, Anselm intoned to no one in particular, pushing another slice toward the feline. Marjorie rolled her eyes and turned to the kitchen, where the real battle was being waged. The innkeeper stood locked in mortal combat with yesterday's stew, now congealed into something that resembled roofing tar. She watched as he attempted to stir the mass with a wooden spoon that bowed alarmingly under the strain. Think of it as aged, he offered weakly, beads of sweat forming on his brow. Outside, the first merchants of the day could be heard arriving, their carts creaking under the weight of fresh provisions and fresh complaints. Marjorie took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and prepared to face another day in the glorious, grimy theater of medieval hospitality. The afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows of the inn's storeroom, illuminating the motley collection of forgotten treasures. Marjorie knelt before the oaken chest, its iron hinges protesting as she lifted the lid. The familiar scent of mildew and memories wafted upward. Another one? The innkeeper grumbled, peering over her shoulder at the new addition. A single leather glove of exceptional quality, its stitching still precise despite years of wear. Left by that wool merchant from Ghent, Marjorie confirmed, running a finger along the soft deerskin. 3 market days passed. She hesitated, feeling the hidden pocket along the inner wrist and the crinkle of parchment within. The innkeeper's eyes gleamed. Could be a map to buried. A laundry list, Marjorie interrupted, unfolding the scrap to reveal precisely that. She sighed and tossed it into the chest, where it joined. A child's carved wooden knight, missing its head. A love poem so terrible it had been folded into a spill for candles. A set of iron keys that no lock in Christendom seemed to fit. In the corner, young Tom the stable boy was pretending to sweep while eyeing a silver-chased dagger that had been in the chest since before Marjorie's time. She snapped the lid shut just as his fingers twitched toward it. "Dream on, boy," she muttered. That blade's claimed more fools than the plague. Upstairs, a sudden commotion erupted. The Flemish merchant was tearing apart his pallet, swearing in 3 languages about missing gloves. Marjorie exchanged a glance with the innkeeper. Without a word, he reached for the ale jug while she prepared her most convincing, I-know-nothing face. Some mysteries, after all, were better left unsolved. The first snow of winter was dusting the inn's thatched roof as Brother Anselm guided the wide-eyed novice through the chaotic common room. The young cleric clutched his satchel to his chest like a shield, his gaze darting between a pair of dice playing mercenaries and a group of minstrels tuning lutes with more enthusiasm than skill. Lesson 1. Anselm shouted over the din, steering the novice toward the hearth. Claim your spot early, but never the one directly in front of the fire. He pointed to a dark stain on the floorboards. That's where young Alfred of York learned about splattering ale and hot iron. At a nearby table, a seasoned traveler was demonstrating the fine art of bread inspection to his wide-eyed squire. "Tap it," the man instructed, knocking his knuckles against the loaf. It produced a sound like a drum. "Good. Now watch." He brought the bread down sharply on the table's edge. The crust didn't crack, but the wood beneath splintered slightly. Even better, Marjorie smirked as she delivered 2 tankards to the German merchants in the corner. One was carefully examining his ale against the light, while the other sniffed suspiciously at the stew. "No floaters today," she assured them in broken German. The merchants exchanged glances before the bolder one ventured a taste. His eyebrows rose in surprise. It was merely mediocre instead of actively dangerous. Up in the rafters, the inn's resident owl observed the scene with golden-eyed disdain. Below its perch, Sir Reginald was attempting to barter his rusted greaves for another night's lodging. The innkeeper rubbed his chin, pretending to consider the offer while subtly angling toward the knight's marginally better preserved dagger. In the doorway, a new group of travelers hesitated on the threshold, their faces a mix of hope and trepidation. Marjorie caught the eye of the youngest, a girl barely out of childhood, and gave her a wink. The girl's shoulders relaxed slightly as she stepped into the warmth. Another night, another collection of stories waiting to unfold.